If I just like it, and then
Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so I'd like to call this meeting to order. First, I'd like a motion to adopt the agenda. All in favor? Okay. And a motion to adopt the minutes. First, we have the regular council minutes held on August 27, 2019. Move adoption. All in favor? Okay. And the minutes of the public hearing held December 11, 2018. Move adoption. All in favor? Okay. And the minutes of the public hearing held on December 11, 2018. Move adoption. All in favor? Okay. And we do have some public comment on agenda items. The first one is for Adam Smallwood on agenda item 8.3. Do you want to come up
right now? Okay, yeah. Did you receive my emails?
Yes.
You did?
Yep.
And you saw the video clips?
Did not see the video.
No. You did? You did? Okay.
I did.
So this is the letter that I attached to it. And it says, these are videos showing some of the issues between Tofino Bus Company and Uwood Road properties. We experience exhaust fumes, high idling Detroit diesel engine noise, and backup alarms. And after allowed operation times, 10 p.m. till 7 a.m. is a noise bylaw. I believe these buses are old machines and have been decommissioned from other communities adopting progressive environmental policies. I have been complaining to Bylaw and Tofino Bus Company for over 2 years, my neighbor over 7. The exhaust fumes will sometimes blanket our properties, especially during southeast weather. The buses will often high idle for over 40 minutes. High idle is much louder and gives off excessive emissions compared to in-town idles. It feels like a vibration running through our homes. For a year, we experienced 5:30 a.m. startups that were clockwork and caused much anxiety. Over a year ago, we were told by the company that they supersede local bylaws pertaining to these issues with permission from the BC Transport Ministry. After a year, we learned that this was not true. And if it was, why are they right beside residential? Uwood properties have honored a green space between the industrial. There is nothing on the industrial side, so there's no buffer. I've been proactive in coming up with solutions such as strategically parking the buses, creating a wall of some sort that I've seen in other municipalities, propane, gas, or electric alternatives, or minimal idling times. I've either been met with dismissal or no follow through on changes. I've seen solutions in other communities. Uwood was zoned for residential in June 2006 before Tofino Bus Company took site in the industrial park. I believe there should have been some foresight in the repercussions of allowing a growing transport company beside residential. After so many years of disturbance and non-action, I'm disappointed to hear that Protective Services wants to implement a policy of non-enforcement. It seems one-sided and careless. Thank you. Do you have any questions?
Any questions? Okay. And Carrie Marshall, speaking to agenda item 8.5.
Good morning. My name is Carrie Marshall, I'm a physician here on the West Coast, and I've been here a few times before speaking. I just wanted to speak to the proposal to open to possibly convert Gas and Go into a beer and wine store. So I have been working here for 8 years and involved in a lot of physician advocacy work in that time, and I will say definitively in every meeting that I have been in, particularly in the last 2 to 3 years, with multi-agency, RCMP, BC Ambulance, First Nations Health Authority, Vancouver Health, VHA. Alcohol predominates all of our conversations. We have a severe alcohol problem on the West Coast here that I think there's probably a big disconnect between people that are using alcohol responsibly and what the reality of our lives look like as physicians, as police officers, as BC Ambulance paramedics. It is, well, in the words of RCMP, it predominates most of their phone calls. It is 25% or so of BC Ambulance phone calls over the summer, and it's at least 15 to 20% of our emergency room presentations. Every study that I've seen, I have a background in public health, I went back to this research yesterday. Every study that I have seen has shown that increasing access to alcohol increases use. And even increasing competition through opening more stores actually increases use because it drives down prices. So I just want everybody to know that we currently have one mental health and substance use provider on the West Coast. We have no sobering and assessment center. We have no detox center. We have no long-term residential treatment for people with alcohol use disorder, and yet it is the predominant conversation of every conversation that your emergency health providers in this on the West Coast have every single time. So I understand that it would decrease traffic into town, but I think that if traffic is a problem into town, there's other ways to do it besides feeding the beast that we're just not resourced for. So there's a public health saying that says basically for us dealing with alcohol is like washing your hands and drying them in the dirt. It just is a continuous cycle. We are totally under-resourced for it, and this will increasing access is going to perpetuate that problem for us. I'd like to see the council really take a stand on moving and shifting their value system in a different direction this and putting a message out that you're going to make a different choice around health in this community.
Thank you. Any questions? Thanks, Carrie.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I don't have a mayor's report today, and there are no delegations. So correspondence. The first one we have is the Tourism Vancouver Island invitation to the AGM. Is there anyone here that's interested in going? No? Okay, so we can move on to the next one. Correspondence from Native Brotherhood of British Columbia and United Fishermen and Allied Workers Union regarding the disaster assistance of commercial fisheries. Does anybody have any comments? Okay, and then the correspondence from the District of Sandwich regarding support for Resolution 2019 Union of British Columbia Municipalities Convention. Oh. Does anybody want to respond? No? Okay. So,
Worship.
pardon?
I'm sorry, if I may go back to 7.1. Ms. Attan just reminded me that Mayor Osborne does go to the TVI conference every year, so perhaps we could have no one here that wants to go. Perhaps council
Okay.
could authorize one
Up to
attendee.
one? Okay. So could I have a motion to authorize up to one member to go to the the Tourism Vancouver Island 56th Annual Vancouver Island Conference in AGM?
I would move that.
Second.
All in favor? Do I need to do and expenses and all that as part of the motion? Or?
Yeah, we can write that in, but as long as it's understood that it's to be reimbursed in accordance with the bylaw and our expense policy.
Okay. Everybody still okay with that? Okay.
Call the vote.
Call a vote? Thanks.
Is that in favor or?
All right.
Okay.
So now we're on to presentations and reports, and we have asked Leslie, trustee from the school district.
Yes.
Sorry.
Sorry, it's Sandy.
Sandy, thank you.
Good morning. I've been in the school board role since last November, so still just learning the various avenues through which you could make change or have any input. And looking at ways to support the West Coast effectively on the Port Alberta School Board. So it's a learning curve for sure. We are doing the seismic upgrading of the high school and the elementary school in Nicolet. And with that, there were some pushes or initiatives to try to look at an alternative for the high school being placed at the site of the multiplex. But that is a completely different pocket of or area of money. The seismic upgrading only looks at making the schools safe. That will not actually even look at including funds for expansion if that was needed. So both the elementary school and the high school are deemed to be large enough for this upcoming population boom that's on the coast now, partly because in the 70s and early 80s there were the 350 kids, 325 kids at the high school and about 290 kids at the elementary school. So they're saying they're large enough and all we're doing is making sure that they're seismically safe. So that's for your information. Do you have any questions about that?
Not specifically about that, but Sandy, maybe you could address we have a growing population at our
Yes.
at our local school, Wickeninish Elementary. The increases there, as I'm sure you're well aware, the portables that are in place.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any consideration for expansion of that facility or any other new spaces being created at Wickeninish Elementary?
I think there was talk of them needing some more room, and this would be by 2022, I believe. Although, that may not be completely accurate, but upcoming. And looking at how to do that. There hasn't been any talk of building a new school yet. So it's complex to even put in new portables because of the whole system for sewer and water. It would be very expensive. So that's all that I know for now. But if you have a presentation or something to put forward to support that school expansion, that would help or be effective, I think. The population on the West Coast is quickly becoming 20% of the district's total population, and that's quite a difference. So Port Alberta has continued to decline. Since 2010, it's been quite significant, and although they're not continuing to decline right now, there is a baby boom out there a bit as well. They're staying pretty stable while we're continuing to expand. So that's a significant portion of the school population for this school district, but we still are these satellites, both physically and sort of on the radar, as far as when they're thinking about schools and what they're going to do.
I just have one more follow-up question that's somewhat related. One of the issues that we've faced here is access to indoor recreation facilities. And in the past, we have had agreements with SD70 for the use of that gym or programming in that gym area. I'm wondering if at this stage, once again, what would be the right mechanism to approach SD70 once again to look at the use of that gym facility from a community perspective, and how best might we direct that? Would it be through you?
Yeah, let me look into that. I've heard of the issues of the pickleball crew especially, but not officially, nor have I seen it brought forward through any school board correspondence or as part of any of our minutes. right now, then I think you're dealing with Drew Ryan, and then through him with the administrative staff at the district office. So if I could inquire as the best way for you to get greater access, is that what you're asking for?
Or at least enter into a conversation, see what it might look like. Yeah, absolutely. Which would entail probably greater access, yes.
Are there any other things that you would like me to look into or bring forward?
I have a question on something you brought up about the possibility of the high school being located at the multiplex. I hadn't heard of that before. Could you
That
background
was Iris Frank at Haistanis, and then it was Kathy's husband, Steve Beck, pushing for having some a closer high school that's closer, and not having the kids from this end of the peninsula having to commute by bus. So it was more informal. It wasn't.
It was just an idea that was raised and it
Yes,
wasn't explored
yeah.
very much. Okay, thanks.
And then just thinking that, well, this announcement for the seismic upgrading, would the school be moved? And it had nothing to do with that. As far as funding, the school owns no land in that area. The whole prospect of actually doing that large a change would be very, very expensive. This school district is very poor. So because of the declining enrollment primarily over the last decade.
Thanks.
Thank you very much. So the next item, the Pacific Rim Hospice Society. Councillor Steer.
Yes, I'll have to excuse myself for conflict of interest. Adjourn my room.
Mr. Steer, do you mind explaining why?
Oh, sorry. I have family connections with the Pacific Rim Hospice Society.
Thank you.
No presentation?
I'll move the recommendation that the 2019 grant application attaches appendices 1 and 2 to the report titled Council Grant Pacific Rim Hospice Society dated September 10, 2019 be approved in the amount of $2,000 to be funded from grants returned from the previous year's approvals.
Second.
Do we have discussion?
Yeah, I would just like to say I went through the grants that we had issued, and nobody had received their grant in full. Everybody had received a portion of what they were looking for, but not their full grant. And while I understand that it's a worthwhile program, etc., it seems that if this grant package had been in with the rest of the grants, everybody would have gotten a little bit less. This does come from our general revenue, I think. Is that right?
It is from taxation revenue, yeah. And
Yeah.
this amount specifically would come from grants that have been returned from the previous years.
Mm-hmm. I understand it's a worthy program, but I feel like it isn't quite fair to give them the full amount that they were asking for. If they had been in the original grant package, they would have received a portion just like everybody else.
Yeah, I agree, but the fact that the money is there and it's just $2,000, I think it's. I mean, if the money wasn't there from the returned previous grants, we wouldn't be able to do this anyway. So that's why I'm in favour of doing it.
Councillor Anton, do you have anything to say?
Yeah, it's I can't recall, but there's also was a maximum of you can't apply for more than 10%, I think, of the entire grant fund, and so some of the applications that we did consider at the time were brought right down to that level right away. So I not remembering all the numbers, but that reduced some of them by half, and then we worked from there. So I just can't think of any fair method of prorating that to go back to it, because some were cut, you know, they might have applied for $7,000 and were cut right down to $2,500 right away, and then others were reduced by less. So there's no way of fairly assessing sort of what level this should be brought down. So it's not a perfect decision or perfect system, but I would support giving them the amount that they've asked for. So at this point, I think it would have been fairer to consider them all at the time, but it was also a bit unfair that they were left out due to a technological error. So here we're trying to correct an imperfect thing to begin with. So I do take a point, though. I just don't know how to fairly apply that to it.
Councillor Wood, did you have a thought of an amount?
To be fair, when you look at the application grants, there was the max amount applied for was $3,400. It's included in here. And we took everybody down. I believe Councillor McMaster had a method where they got 75% of what they were looking for after the allowable, like hitting the allowable 10%. If the rest of council wants to proceed and give them $2,000, then sure.
Councillor Mansell?
I'm happy to give them $2,000. I think it just needs to be done.
So for myself, I originally agree with Councillor McQuaid in that in fairness, keeping with most people not getting the amount, but it is a small amount at this point. There was an error. I did have a thought for council about, or a question about how well we emphasize the application process and how important it is to follow up when you don't receive a confirmation email, and if maybe even going forward that could be a bigger emphasis if it's not, to avoid this happening in the future. I gather it has happened in the past before various reasons.
This hasn't happened specifically. We used to have the emails go into someone's email account, and sometimes it would get lost, and so we have a designated email address that all the applications go into, and there was no auto reply that went back to the Hospice Society, and so that's how it was discovered. But the societies are busy, and they didn't get back to us for a few months, and so when we discovered the error, we felt it was appropriate to bring it back. Something that may help is we did make some changes to the policy many years ago, where we tried to encourage societies to apply for a specific program or a portion of a program. So often the amounts that are being applied for aren't sort of general or generic amounts. They are for a specific program for the society. So by doing that, we encourage the societies to look for other sources of fund to fund the entire project, and then this would be a specific portion of that funding. So I don't know if that helps.
Okay. So this time I'll be in favor as well to go forward. So we've called the question.
Got a motion on the table, we have to call the vote.
Call the vote, all in favor actually I'll have to read it out in just a second. That the 2019 grant application attached as appendices 1 and 2 to the report titled Council Grant Pacific Rim Hospice Society dated September 10th, 2019 be approved in the amount of $2,000 to be funded from grants returned from the previous year's approvals. All in favor? Okay, motion carried. So we move on to items 8.3.
Let's get Councillor
Oh,
Steer
Councillor
back.
Steer. We have presentation.
So my name is Carrie Marshall. I'm the Bylaw Supervisor for the District of Tofino. So this report is on transportation-related noise complaints. The purpose of this report is to recommend a policy of non-enforcement regarding ongoing noise complaints for idling buses and for backup alarms from both buses and delivery trucks in anticipation of the development of a new nuisance bylaw. These ongoing issues have been very difficult for both the affected residents and the business operators. Due to the sensitive nature of this topic, the Protective Services Department is seeking the guidance of Mayor and Council. So just to go through a bit of the history on this issue. So Tofino Bus relocated their depot in order to resolve a prior history of complaints when they had previously been operating in the Wickeninish Community School. Tofino Bus has been operating its depot at 640 Warren Way since 2008. 640 Warren Way borders on the U-Wood development. The first lots in U-Wood were listed for sale in 2009. 640 Warren Way is zoned light industrial district, is noted as M2, under which transportation uses are permitted, and they are described as meaning a use providing for the shipping and receiving of goods and people, including airports, helipads, truck terminals, wharves, delivery, and express uses. So just an idea on the history. As previously mentioned, there was noise complaints due to the buses idling at Wickeninish Community School, and this was resolved by moving to 640 Warren Way. Beginning in February 2017, we've been receiving ongoing noise complaints due to buses idling in the depot between the hours of 10 p.m. and 7 a.m. The complainants cite the following: loss of sleep, disturbance of peace, and also health concerns regarding air quality from diesel exhaust. The buses idle for extended periods of time, sometimes around 15 to 30 minutes, for a variety of reasons. There's BC, CBSE, and Transport Canada regulated pre-trip checks required before moving any vehicles, mechanical diagnostics and repairs at time of discovery, pre-warming and defrosting in the winter and cooling in the summer, and cleaning buses and relocating within the lot. So this picture just gives you an idea of the location and the proximity. Outlined is the location in 648, which is used by Tofino Bus, and as you can see, the distance is 49 meters from the center of U-Wood Road. And the buses are, does this have laser pointer?
Yeah, hold this one. I want to point
Okay. Whoa. So the buses are often parked along the back and along the side, just to give an idea of how close it can be. So the District of Tofino Public Property Use Regulation Bylaw, Section 7.1 states that no person shall make, allow, or cause to be made any loud, objectionable, or unnecessary noise anywhere within the district which may disturb or tend to disturb the peace, quiet, rest, enjoyment, comfort, and/or convenience of the neighborhood or persons in which such sound or noise is received between the hours of 10 p.m. of one day and 7 a.m. of the next day. Following the complaints, Tofino Bus has implemented changes including eliminating the 6:30 a.m. departure from their Cross Island schedule, eliminating the 7:30 a.m. departure from the free shuttle schedule, moving bus maintenance items such as light duty maintenance, toilet dumping and cleaning to time of arrival in the evening around 8 p.m. to be completed within the noise bylaw hours. As a result, they only need to idle for pre-trip checks in the morning. Following these changes, there have been fewer incidents of buses starting between 6:30 and 7 a.m. during the school year, mostly on colder days. There continue to be safe ride home buses that result in buses idling before and after these trips, which often occur after 10 p.m. Tofino Bus provides the following services within the community of Tofino. Summer and special event free shuttles is contracted by the district. School bus services is contracted by School District 70. Safe ride home shuttles provided for public and private events, and cross-island transportation. Some of the benefits of these services include decreasing the number of cars on district roads, providing transportation for those unable to drive, providing safe transport to school for children and youth, and reducing impaired driving following events. So the options that we're presenting to Council today are either to create a policy of non-enforcement regarding noise between 10 p.m. and 7 a.m., specifically exempting buses idling in their depots, as well as horns or signaling devices where properly or necessarily used as a warning signal, or to limit the operations of buses to the hours of 7 a.m. to 10 p.m. by enforcing and issuing fines for any confirmed infractions outside those hours, including buses idling or backup alarms, barring emergencies or unexpected mechanical difficulties, and that either choice be included in any further amendments to the public property use regulation bylaw and in the development of a nuisance bylaw. In researching for this report, staff were able to find precedents of other municipalities writing specific exemptions for both buses idling in their depots, as well as backup alarms and other vehicle safety signaling devices in their noise control bylaws. Should staff be directed to pursue enforcement, some of these services would be affected based on feedback from the previous owner and manager of Tofino Bus. Operators have expressed they experienced difficulty completing all required tasks between 7 a.m. and the required departure time of 7:20 a.m. for the first school bus run, and have expressed concern that if drivers rush through their safety checks and trip preparation, that some hazards may be missed, and have also expressed that it would be challenging to move the depot elsewhere, considering the local scarcity of appropriately zoned land. Our recommendation is that staff be directed to draft a policy of non-enforcement regarding noise complaints from idling or continuously running trucks or buses when located within a depot, as well as noise from horns or signaling devices used as a danger or warning signal incidental to the safe operation of a motor vehicle, and that exemptions be provided for the above considerations when drafting a nuisance bylaw or any future amendments to the District of Tofino Public Property Use Regulation Bylaw number 1098/2009. These ongoing issues have been very difficult for both the affected residents and the business owners, and bylaw staff has struggled to balance the needs of the neighbors, the business operators, and the general public. Due to the sensitive nature of this topic, staff are requesting the guidance of Mayor and Council.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, just I sort of get the impression that staff has been working with the operator of the bus company to try and mitigate some of these things. So I'm wondering why the buses have to park so close, like on that side of the lot. Why can't they park on the other side of the lot? Has the operator indicated any reason that they have to park in those places?
Yeah, I'm just going to short answer and then also pass over to Brent Baker because he's been working with this a lot as well. But there have been some experiments with moving the buses and parking elsewhere, but I'll just ask Brent if he can speak further on that.
Yeah, there's been times where it's been tried to move the buses to the further location. The school buses alone, there's 3 to 4 school buses, I believe. So just due to lack of space overall, something does have to be close to that property line. And there also is the charter buses and all sorts of things as well. It does take up some of the space. So efforts have been made to relocate buses and shuffle that around. However, I can't really speak to what effect it's actually had, if it's produced better results or not. We haven't really had that feedback to say how it's worked out. So.
And the other question I have is, and I'm not sure if we can require fencing, or there is noise barrier type fencing that is employed, and I've seen it in other places, and I'm wondering if that's been explored at all, and if it's been suggested by the person that addressed us at the beginning of the meeting, that fencing might be used, and I'm just wondering if that's an option, and if the district could require that, or how we might get there if necessary.
Good question.
I think it's something that should have been thought of at the time of subdivision of this place, because the industrial zonings did exist prior to the subdivision altogether. So that's another thing that I kind of know about.
Correct.
Maybe you can't answer that right now, but
yeah,
another staff member might know something about that.
I'm not sure the style of fencing that's been considered. The one piece that I do know is that there is an existing fence that divides the property where the Tofino bus currently resides and the residence is there. I am also aware that I believe at least 2 or 3 of the residences that directly back onto that property have created their own gates for access from their property through the Tofino bus area as well too. So I don't know what's sort of been looked into and what may have been discussed in meetings between some of the residences and the business owner. But I'm not sure how those gates would also fit into that as well too. But there are a number of gates to access in and out of those properties.
Okay, that's all I think.
Somebody else have any questions? Questions before we move to debate?
Yeah, I mean, it's fine having a fence, but if it's just a wood fence, it's not really going to do a lot. You know, I mean, I think you've got to look at some sort of sound wall, and I'd like to see whether the bus company would be amenable to be doing something like that. I'm also concerned about the diesel fumes. I don't know how you're going to manage that. I don't know enough about idling vehicles and things, but having looked at the videos, I wouldn't be too happy if I were.
Currently, as far as the diesel fumes, we aren't able to address that under bylaw because our current anti-idling bylaw does have a specific exemption for mechanical tests, and I do have it here that I could read through, but at this time, that's not something that we have the tools to address by bylaw.
I guess I have a question, kind of follow up on Councillor Anderson's, in really, to the extent that we have worked with the property owners with the complaints and mitigating it, and it seems like I didn't really see a lot of them there, so I was...
Yeah, so here, let me just look through. There have been meetings organized between, not only between the residents and the business, but also there's been meetings between the residents and the bylaw staff, between the bylaw staff and Tofino bus, and all together. And I just might ask, because Brent has been the one who's been dealing most with this file, but I'm just gonna look.
Yeah, mostly in the meeting it's discussing the concerns and the possible steps that we do have with the tools available to us to try and work through the issue. We do really struggle that many people would consider the bus to be an essential service. There is not another location based on our current zoning where it could be located. And completely understand that it is a really difficult situation that affects people on both sides. And that's been going on for years. So we have worked with the bus operators to try and come up with solutions of relocating the buses within the property. One of the big parts is when there are mechanical issues with the buses that are sort of identified towards the end of the shift. Those issues have to be sort of worked through prior to them leaving the lot the following morning. So a lot of the instances of the noise after 10 p.m. is troubleshooting mechanical issues on site to meet the Transportation Canada requirements of having them sorted out before they move anywhere. And other steps that we have done, we have had complaints issued around some of the colder days last season, and with bus idling times and those sorts of things. And so I personally, on one of the coldest days last year, visited the site at about 6:30 in the morning to record the startup times of all the buses, the length of times that they're idling on the lot prior to moving, and those sorts of things. And I believe it was December 4th last year, one of the coldest days of our winter, where I had all that information recorded. I went around and I stood in the driveways of the properties that are being affected by it to listen and gauge what the noise levels were. And from the information that I provided back to the complainants at that time, the longest idling period on a day where it was expected that they would run longer was about 20 minutes. And that was for a bus that started after 7 p.m. or 7 a.m. and departed by about 7:22 or something like that. So there was one bus that started up at about 6:50, idled for 15 minutes, and then off it went for that early run. But it's really tricky to really kind of nail it down. And it's different every day based on the needs of the operations of the buses.
One concern I have, if this was to pass, does that take away the sort of importance for the bus drivers to minimize their idling time? Like they're not gonna, there's gonna be no consequences, so they can take their times doing their check, you know, it takes away that.
I think it's a really good question, but I think we've got a fairly good relationship with the operators and moving forward with the new owners as well to really try and stress the impact that it's having on residents within the community and to work together to ensure that that's an important aspect, that those times are minimized whenever possible. I think they work really hard. It's not a pleasant situation for them. They definitely feel the stress of the scenario as well too, and I think their goal is to minimize that and do what is required and then carry on with the business. So it's not nobody wants to be there longer than required and have them running as well too. So.
Anybody have any more questions?
That was my question.
I get the sense that remediation of the issue is where everyone would like to see it resolved, and I'm just curious, as you've laid out some of the options that are available to us at this stage, is those continued negotiations at remediation with the operator, the complainant, and the district. Do you feel that would prove to be fruitful in that engagement process, or are you seeking that enforcement or non-enforcement capability at this point?
I think, so there's been a lot of back and forth in this issue, and the struggle that the Protective Services Department has faced is it for us to make that choice? And we're looking, and that is why we're seeking the direction of council to ask where would council like us to take this matter. And it's definitely, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there's the option to seek other alternatives. And as well, in developing a policy of non-enforcement, that is something that still has the potential to come to council, and that there be changes requested in that to potentially address some of your concerns, that, to make it, I suppose, specific enough that if there were egregious change, that it could be addressed.
Anybody else have any questions? You can have a seat.
Can I just add one comment on noise attenuation fences, just the experience from a previous career where those fences are kind of difficult to make work, and I think in this circumstance where the Ewood subdivision sits superior, if you will, above the industrial park. Noise from vehicles travels from two sources, the tailpipe and the engine, and so you have to make sure you cover both of those. And noise travels at approximately 45-degree angle, so building a 6-foot fence or an 8-foot fence at the bottom of that slope is probably not going to have much of an effect on noise. So ideally, from a noise perspective, you'd build the fence as close to where you don't want to receive the noise as possible, and that's not going to. I would suspect if I were a homeowner there, I wouldn't be too enthusiastic about a solid 8-foot fence and 10 feet outside my back door. So the fence may not be the solution. I would suspect that something close to full enclosure would have to occur for the noise to be well contained. So that's I think where a big part of the challenge is, where it's not as though there are a great number of buses and that would justify the expense of full enclosure. And as my colleagues have mentioned, this is a very difficult issue that has no kind of great answer to it.
Is it the whole neighbourhood that's affected, or is it just a few houses?
We only have 2 registered complainants at this time.
It might be cheaper to have noise attenuating windows in the houses and build a fence, that's all.
I think at this point it's important to gesture to the fact that adopting a policy of non-enforcement doesn't mean that the space doesn't exist, as our presenter mentioned, to have a conversation that continues with both the community and the business owner. To what end that's guided by council, I think is important to know.
Does anybody want to make a motion?
I don't think anybody wants to.
That's fine.
I really hesitate to go to the non-enforcement. I mean, I see it, that there's other parts of non-enforcement and in the report about transportation, the backup signals and so on that we get complaints elsewhere about as well. I'd be in favor of moving on that part of the report. I just don't think everything's been explored, and I'm afraid if we go to non-enforcement that it's sort of all that's dealt with when it's done, and you just have to put up with it. And I think there's still measures that can be taken that can mitigate some of it. I don't think it's going to be, the situation will ever be completely satisfactory. I think you can alleviate some of the symptoms of the noise. I can't see how you're going to alleviate the diesel fumes. And part of me is, as sort of harsh as it sounds, is sort of you built your house in a bad place for your needs and your sensitivity to those things. But I don't know if the Tofino transport was located there at the time that people located their houses either. So that's not the best solution either. But to move towards non-enforcement, I'm just afraid that more work won't be done to try and mitigate it. So that's my hesitation in fully supporting the non-enforcement option.
Can I ask procedurally, can we move forward on the non-enforcement with the stipulation that there is for that conversation, or does that kind of just contradict itself?
So there's no reason why the two can't happen in parallel. The other thing that I guess we want to point out is we would be bringing back a policy for council to consider with respect to what non-enforcement looks like, and we can narrow that as much as council chooses. For example, restrict it just to school buses and scheduled transit service. And so, notwithstanding the comments we heard about alcohol and getting people off the roads who've been drinking, the party buses that want to pull in there at midnight, maybe they have to find another solution. So, I wonder if we can narrow the scope significantly to address those kinds of essential public needs. I'm thinking in particular of school buses, because I think we can look at our free, the shuttle is winding down now. We could look at that schedule for next year. We've limited the morning start time. We can look at the when it finishes in the evening, so it does not offend the bylaw or has less risk of offending the bylaw. And then, so maybe the focus is, do we want to find a way to allow school buses to not be offending our bylaw while we look for a solution? So I think that if council were to, we've heard from council that there's, there's reluctance to go too far with this, and maybe some more information on what some of the attenuation things that could be put in place. So we can come back to council with both of those things at some point in the future.
Okay.
And is that direction that you require from us right now?
I would think so, yes.
Okay.
So do we defer this then, or this motion? Or?
Let me just read what the motion. I think that the first motion in particular, it still has to come back to the policy. Still has to come back to council for consideration. Mm-hmm. So, if that resolution could you know, if council would like to move that resolution forward, as well as direct staff to meet with the owner for noise attenuation solutions, then we can bring both of those back.
Okay. Did somebody want to make that motion?
I'm going to write it.
Yeah, I was going to say, I was looking over it, can't come back, I see.
Yeah. So are we taking out the
So
bottom part that says, and the exemption be provided for, so we need to make it just the top paragraph, basically,
Yeah, and some direction to staff
and some direction to staff.
to continue working with the owner, as the CAS.
Okay, I can make it. So I'll move the recommendation that staff be directed to draft a policy of non-enforcement regarding noise complaints from idling or continuously running trucks or buses when located within a depot, as well as noise from horns or signaling devices used as a danger or warning signal incidental to the safe operation of a motor vehicle, and that staff is directed to, I didn't finish writing. Work with, consult with, to continue to mitigate the noise issues.
That's
Good enough.
That's great direction.
Okay.
Second.
Any discussion? Okay, all in
Just,
favor?
One more comment I had in thinking about this issue is that I'm trying to imagine other uses that the light industrial allows that could possibly even be worse than this. And I mean, it could be a sawmill there or something that might be even worse. So, I mean, we move through this particular issue in this instance, but I really think that going into the future, there's other pieces of land that could end up having other issues that are going to conflict with the residential use. So I don't know if there's anything we can do about that, but it's kind of a warning of that there's, when you're located next to commercial or industrial land, there are times when conflicts are going to come up between residential and other more intensive uses. So I think it's, I mean, it's partly why zoning exists, is to try and mitigate some of these conflicts. But zonings do butt up against each other, and I don't know how all those things are going to be solved. So it's just kind of a heads up that anyone, when you're locating, and it's hard to locate anything anywhere in Tofino, that conflicts might arise.
Thank you. We have a motion on the table, so all in favor? Okay, motion carried. So now we're moving on to the temporary road closure for the RCMP opening ceremony. Do we have a presentation?
I'll move that the temporary road closure between the hours of 10 a.m. and 4 p.m. is outlined in the staff report. Temporary road closure RCMP opening ceremony October 4th, 2019, dated September 10th, 2019, be approved to accommodate the RCMP opening ceremony event and include the following conditions: provision of a $500 refundable damage deposit, provision of a certificate of insurance naming the District of Tofino as additional insured, provision of a traffic management plan, notification of residents in the surrounding neighborhood by the event organizers outlining road closure and event details.
Second.
Is there any questions or discussion? Okay, all in favor? Okay, we move on to the zoning amendment application for the gas and go at 901 Campbell Street. Anyone report?
Good morning, councilors. So the first report I have for you this morning is first reading for the zoning amendment proposed for the gas and go at 901 Campbell Street. brief background of the application. It was originally received on September 11, 2018. Permission to proceed was granted on May 28, 2019. Some of the concerns that were raised with the permission to proceed include access to lands beyond, making sure that was actually secured, increased access to alcohol in the community, concerns around the form and character of the development, and the general increase in commercial use in the area. I know there's a number of kind of discussion points raised around those general things. So the location is just off Campbell Street, just kind of near where it kind of turns into Pacific Rim Highway on the western side of the road. The proposal is basically a zoning text amendment that would allow the sale of alcohol on the subject property. Alcohol sales will be located within the existing convenience store. There's no proposed changes to the building footprint or the overall site layout. There are updates to the building facade and general appearance that are proposed, but there would be no expansion of the current footprint of the convenience store or anything of that. So a brief look at this is just kind of the initial plan that's been provided to staff. The total square footage is just under 3,000 square feet. Not all of that is used for retail. Proposed liquor store area would be, I guess that's kind of on the right-hand side as you enter the store through the existing doorway. There were some preliminary elevations that were provided that showed an additional doorway basically on the right-hand side of the building there when you're looking at this picture. However, those are, again, very preliminary drawings, so I'm not sure exactly if that would be how the form and character will turn out should this proposal move forward. It is also worth mentioning that the convenience store is considered legally non-conforming. It's in excess of the size requirements that are permitted for other convenience stores in similar zones. However, as there would be no increase in footprint or no changes to the footprint of the store, there would be no additional kind of requirements triggered by this rezoning unless there was a building permit that may trigger further discussion of that. So again, here's that elevation that was provided to staff. You can see a proposed new entrance. Again, this is just a preliminary drawing, but a proposed new entrance on, I guess that would be kind of the northern side of the store there. Just as you would enter, there's currently some existing parking there. I believe that parking would be continuing to exist there as well. A brief look at some of the policies staff use to examine these kinds of application. Within the vision to action, basically there's broad support for a unique and strong local economy and broad support for smaller businesses within the district of Tofino. The official community plan designates the property as the Clackwood Estates. Clackwood Estates is a residential neighborhood. Commercial is supported in what's defined as neighborhood nodes. We haven't currently identified exactly where those neighborhood nodes are. However, there are no, I guess, prohibitions for commercial activity within that designation. One other thing to note is that additional highway commercial development is discouraged within the official community plan. However, there's no change in use in this proposal. It's a change in the product that's being sold. It's still a retail store, so staff feel that this does not constitute additional highway development. So within the context of the official community plan, so it does not need an OCP amendment. Zoning, property is currently zoned highway commercial district. That's a C4 zoning. Alcohol sales are not a permitted use within this zone. Alcohol sales are not permitted within standard retail commercial zones. They're identified and permitted very specifically in particular zones. Right now, the two other zones that permit alcohol sales are the C2A zone and the Shore Comprehensive Development Zone. So this amendment would allow alcohol sale within the C4 zone, but that alcohol sale would then be limited to the subject property and not apply broadly to other C4 zones within the district. So some of the land use considerations, a few of these things that we talked about at the permission to proceed stage, but just to go over them again. Design, this isn't a form and character development program area, so any designs, if you know, there's any discussion about how the form and character of the building should look, that needs to be discussed at the rezoning stage, so you can either at this first reading or the next couple readings of the bylaw. Traffic, this was a pretty major one, so this is kind of one of the ones that staff support for the application basically hinges on. Right now, we look at these kinds of applications through a very particular framework. We don't have an established framework for things like social impacts or social planning, those kinds of things. We really look at it just from a land use consideration. one of the major drivers for this application, at least from staff's perspective, is that by spreading out commercial uses throughout the district, we can potentially reduce the traffic into town. There's been, again, a lot of this evidence at this point is anecdotal. We haven't asked for a traffic study. However, there is a lot of discussion ongoing throughout the community to do with the lack of parking, congestion, particularly in the summer months, and spreading out commercial uses could potentially ease these issues. Traffic, as far as the direct intersection with the property and Campbell Street, it's not really anticipated, at least by staff, again, anecdotal evidence that this will increase traffic in any significant way. Again, we're not looking at a change in use, we're just looking at a change in product that's sold in the store. There's also significant traffic that continues on to the trailer park located just west of the property. Servicing, it's not anticipated that this will change demands on district services. Potentially renovations to the property as a result of this rezoning may, however, that would be looked at the building permit stage. Amenity contribution, this is something that we've been in discussions with the applicant. I don't have anything solid to bring forward to council at this point, but it is something that we're considering. Any rezoning triggers the community amenity contribution policy. This one is a little bit, I wouldn't say unique, but particular in that we're not, the community amenity contribution policy is either based on a change in use or a change in density of that use. This isn't a change in use, and it's not really a change in density in use either, so it's a little bit of a different discussion. But should the application continue, we'll be bringing that forward to council probably the next meeting of the bylaw. Parking, right now they have in excess of the required parking for the convenience store and the uses on the property. It's not anticipated that additional parking will be needed as a result of this rezoning. Again, the idea of the neighborhood node, that isn't clearly defined, but it is mentioned in our OCP, so something worth considering regarding kind of the continuation and increase of commercial activity in what are designated as residential areas in the OCP. So something worth considering, although we don't have a specific designation or a specific definition for that. And then also impacts on other zones. So as I mentioned earlier, there are 2 other zones right now that are permitted to sell alcohol in the district of Tofino. This change in, or this additional, zoning amendment will not really affect those at all, but what we will be doing through the zoning amendment is actually clearly defining what a wine and beer store is. In the other zones, that's essentially what is a permitted use. We don't actually have a definition for that in the zoning bylaw, so this will formalize that use in other zones. One other thing that was brought up, and I think there's been a number of letters to council regarding this, as well as we heard from Dr. Carrie Marshall, and it's something that's definitely on the forefront of a lot of people's minds. Staff included our community health considerations. This was something that was brought up during the permission to proceed stage. One of the major reasons that staff are supporting this is that we look at these kinds of applications strictly through a land use lens. So we have established frameworks such as the OCP, zoning bylaw, other policies and studies that we use to look at these kinds of applications. We don't have an alcohol policy. We don't have any sort of framework for viewing things from a community health perspective outside of personal opinions, and those are, as far as staff are concerned, not really relevant. Staff personal opinions are not really relevant in this discussion. So, like I mentioned, a large part of staff's support for this application hinged on kind of the dispersal of traffic and the perceived ease of congestion throughout the district of Tofino. However, I think we'd like to acknowledge that community health considerations are also something that is foremost in council's mind, and probably a big part of the discussion of this zoning application. So moving forward, some of the options that we have would be to grant first reading to this bylaw, grant first reading as amended, reject or refuse the application, or defer or otherwise deal with the application. As has been mentioned, staff are recommending the first option. Should the application proceed, the next steps would be to refer to any affected agencies. We'd probably have a continuation of the amenity discussion with the applicants. Hopefully by second reading, have something firmed up to bring to council. If that things are continuing to move along, we then move through public hearing, third reading, before reaching final reading and adoption of the bylaw. Thanks for your attention. If you have any questions or comments, I'm happy to try and answer.
Any questions for you?
Well, I do.
Yeah.
As anticipated, there is there's no secret to my opposition. But specifically to the report, the primary reason you've made very clear is the potential mitigation of congestion in the downtown core. And it was pointed out that there is no evidence for that. And I would just like that to be pointed out, that at this point, it is based on the experience of staff that this is a potential mitigation. So that being said, in part of the report, it stated that there are no other alcohol outlets in the vicinity, and that is incorrect. Approximately 350 meters from the Gas and Go towards the southeast is the Tofino Brewery, which retails beer, and the Tofino Distillery, which retails alcohol. So there is access in the neighborhood. In terms of that single-purpose trip in, which I'm assuming having the alcohol outlet there would help to mitigate that traffic, that's already being taken care of, in my opinion, at those two locations. I just had a quick question also regarding the legally non-conforming aspect of it. I understand that within that use, that is approximately 93 square meters that is allowed for the retail use within that, permitted within that area, which is approximately 1,000 square feet. And the current space by your report is approximately 50% greater, about over 50% greater at 155 square meters. Why or how did it become legally non-conforming?
So, I don't have a specific answer for you. My understanding is that when that property was originally operated as a service station, I think by Harry Thielman, the zoning bylaw that we had in place at that point was not as developed or potentially as specific as it is now. And so I believe that structure is older than the current zoning bylaw. And by existing prior to the current zoning bylaw, it has been grandfathered is kind of a colloquial term for it, but granted this legal non-conforming status because it was existence in the size and use that exists today prior to the existence of our current zoning bylaw. So that would be, my understanding is that there's kind of two ways things can be legally non-conforming, either by use or by siting or size, and so this would be legally non-conforming by siting or size. And how that affects the structure itself is typically through building permits. So if they wanted to do some major renovations that require a building permit, they would also require a variance at that point in order to basically bring the existing structure into conformance with the zoning bylaw. However, during this rezoning, it's a consideration from staff, but it isn't something that we necessarily have the tools to force them to reduce the size of the existing convenience store.
Thank you. I don't have any further questions until the discussion phase.
I have no questions. I'm in agreement with Councillor Steer. I think we've heard a presentation from Dr. Hasselhoff.
If there's no more questions, I'll let Pete sit down.
I did have one, yeah. In the report, it said that a development permit may be required around the idea that it falls within a riparian development permit area. And I'm just wondering why we're saying may be required. We don't know, or if something will trigger it?
Yeah, typically development permits are triggered by building permits. So should this rezoning, kind of follow up with a major renovation of the store, that building permit, there's a riparian area or designated development permit area, riparian area based off of Esso Creek that extends into the property. And should they be renovating kind of within that development permit area, they would also require a development permit. So I wrote may because it depends to a certain extent, the extent of potential renovations and those kinds of things. But that's not something that's triggered by rezoning. That would be triggered by further development by the property like the building permit.
Thanks.
Sorry, I do have a question for you as well. It has never been done in the past, but reading John Sutley's Kaylee's letter, is there any way for amenities to be put towards something such as abuse programs or like something different than we ever done before, or is it quite strict?
We do have a community amenities policy that's been adopted by council. Again, that's just a policy, so I do believe that there are, an applicant can bring forward an amenities package for council's consideration that doesn't conform with the policy, and that would be at council's discretion how to evaluate that. But I would also defer to the CAO because
It's, and in fact, the amenities is like an amenities guideline, so it isn't even as a policy. So certainly there could be an amenity directed to anything that the municipality and an applicant agree upon.
Okay. Thank you. And then I had a question that I did ask earlier, but I'm just going to ask it now, just for sort of. But there are no other zoning for alcohol, for liquor stores out that way. Everything else is in town. To confirm.
that's my understanding. Beyond the Tofino Brewery and the distillery, currently there's no other zoning that would permit that. There are, of course, restaurants and those kinds of facilities that do serve alcohol, but as far as retail sales, to my knowledge, there are none.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Councilor McMaster, you had a...
I was saying we had quite a powerful presentation from Dr. Hasselhoff about 6 months ago, and we've heard a similar thing from Dr. Marshall this morning, and I just wonder how long we can continue to ignore this message. I had a conversation with liquor inspectors on Saturday night. They told me there's bigger problems of intoxication now because of the legalization of cannabis, because people are combining cannabis and alcohol, so this problem is going to get worse. And I think it's time we start to limit things a little bit.
I'm not a prohibitionist by any stretch, but the presentation of a potential mitigation of traffic versus the almost express and certain impacts of availability and use that have been presented by Carrie Marshall, Dr. Hasselbeck, that even Councillor Stair has presented this morning, they all have to be considered by council, and I understand that this is a land use policy or a land use decision, but I just can't be in favor of it. I believe that the tension that's here that everyone is gesturing towards between reducing traffic and parking resources and taxing our first responders and our mental health system is one that it's a no-brainer for me. I believe that there is some sort of culture shift required on the West Coast for our alcohol use, and I don't think that that will originate at council, but I do think that we have these small measures that we can take that can perhaps guide our town and our council decisions towards what we'd like as a culture here. So I'm not in favor.
I'm just referring to at the beginning of the report, top 6 council goals. The only goal that it comes close to meeting is economic development, just plain economic development, not any qualified type of economic development. So and thinking about our strategic plan that we just adopted, we have a whole bunch of goals around community health and the type of ways we would like to see Tofino grow and enhanced. And I don't think this doesn't fall within any of those council goals that were expressed in the strategic plan. So just on that alone, I would not support it. I do additionally have concerns about parking and traffic. I do, and in town, and this might alleviate. I just don't feel that's even a strong enough argument to move this forward on. I initially, when this came forward, I kind of supported that idea, and I was looking at that side too, but sort of in the larger context, I think council should be moving on healthier options for Tofino, and I think that's also what our community wants. So I will not support moving forward at this point.
I guess I feel it's not necessary to read out my 3 pages of notes that I had on this, so I will save you all the time now. I will read out the motion though.
Right, can
I
am in support of it. I
sorry.
will be the one person to say it. I do see I do think we have a bigger alcohol issue in town that does need to be addressed. In this case, I look at the traffic not just from in-town congestion, but also just accessibility for people that don't abuse it. And while there is, liquor and beer out there, there isn't wine or ciders or varieties. So having that ability just to head in and grab a bottle of wine for dinner, like there's that side of the picture as well that I would like to represent. I do see this not going to get passed, so I'll just say on that. But I do think that we definitely, going forward, do need to look at the alcohol substance abuse portion of that, but maybe not right here. So you can make a motion now. Is this here?
That the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1269 2019 be introduced and read a first time.
Yeah.
Sorry, did I?
You
I
can't
was just gonna
defeat this
move that
motion,
one.
or
Yeah.
I think a better procedural way would be to actually refuse or reject the application at this stage instead of,
That's what I
Yeah.
was going to do. I'll move that the application be rejected or refused.
Second.
Second. So, all in favor of defeating the motion, the application,
Rejecting it.
rejecting the application? Opposed? Okay, so we'll move on to zoning amendment application to Tofino Brewery, 691 Industrial Way, report from Community Sustainability.
Right. So the second zoning amendment application that we have for this morning is from Tofino Brewing Company. They're at 691 Industrial Way. This is the permission to proceed stage of the zoning amendment application process. So brief background, the application was received February 6, 2019. There was, I believe, a presentation made to council by the applicants several months ago. And this is kind of a continuation, I would say, of zoning amendments that was originally began in 2016 with that amendment adopted towards the end of 2017. And this is kind of carrying on in that same spirit as basically an enlargement of the use that was permitted for that zoning amendment. So the location is just up Industrial Way. I guess on the south side of Industrial Way, borders with the paramedic, the ambulance station, as well as a large undeveloped property, and then also borders west with another industrial use kind of complex. So the proposal is basically a zoning text amendment to expand the existing accessory lounge from 68 square meters and 35 seats to a proposed 136 square meters and 88 seats. Those are kind of just the initial numbers that we've been discussing with applicants. Again, at the permission to proceed stage, there's lots of room for flexibility as we move forward, should the application move forward. This amendment would allow the applicant to meet the existing, or pardon me, to expand the current business operations to meet demand. The applicants have mentioned to staff that they feel that their business is being held back by the current restrictions on the accessory lounge, and that there is considerable demand for them to increase the size and density. So these are the preliminary sketches that are provided. This is kind of the entrance.
Oh, the bottom one, yeah.
Oh, gotcha. So the entrance to the brewery is approximately right there, and then this shaded area would show. This is approximately what exists now as the accessory lounge. What the applicants would like to do would be to retain all that area as well as continue the accessory lounge use down the little hallway there, and then also up into the mezzanine area that has been recently constructed right in that area. So it basically be 2 levels of lounge. So a brief look at some of the policies that we use to evaluate these types of applications. Vision to Action talks again about a strong and unique local economy, and also has broad support for locally owned businesses as well. The official community plan designates the property in the entire area as light industrial. It's basically an industrial neighborhood. Industrial uses are encouraged to locate here within the official community plan. Economic policies within the official community plan do include support for local businesses, year-round employment, and more year-round economy as well. The zoning, property is zoned industrial park district. Industrial wholesale, kind of manufacturing uses are the primary uses permitted in this area. Accessory retail use is permitted, so you probably noted a lot of the businesses up there have retail kind of storefronts associated with them. Currently, the accessory lounge is considered an accessory retail use to the brewery. The current accessory lounge use was granted under bylaw number 1223 from 2016. And basically that bylaw defines accessory lounge and permits it on a specific property. The definition allows 35 seats and 68 square meters for alcohol sales, service, and consumption. One of the other kind of more interesting pieces of information that staff have at their disposal is the industrial way review. This directly pertains to this application. It was recently completed last fall. And one of the primary kind of, I guess, policies or guidelines within this industrial way review is that it really discourages the dilution of the industrial lands by commercial uses in order to retain those industrial lands for their intended use, which broadly supports the economy of Tofino. However, there is encouragement and kind of policies that basically support retail in conjunction with industrial use, up to a maximum of approximately 10% of the overall floor area of the industrial use. So the current accessory lounge floor area use is about 6%. The proposed is approximately 13%. So a few land use considerations. Parking is a major one with any of these kinds of uses. Right now there is a dwelling unit on property. One spot needs to be reserved for that, and then within the industrial use of the property, I believe 5 spots need to be reserved for that. So there's 28 total spots that have been indicated on the plans that the applicant has provided staff, which then leaves us with 22 spots that can be used to service the accessory lounge. We don't have a direct way to compare physical parking spots to potential seats within an accessory lounge in an industrial area. However, if this were a commercial area and we were considering a restaurant, which appears the same and would function in a very similar way, we would permit 4 seats per parking space. So that's where we ended up at the 88 total seats number based on the number of parking spaces that are currently existing on the property. Traffic, another land use consideration, kind of coming off of Campbell Street heading into Industrial Way and also onto the property. That is not anticipated to change in any great manner. There are a number of businesses up Industrial Way that experience traffic. The brewery itself is quite a popular, busy business, and it's frequently that the parking lot is full, not always with patrons in the accessory lounge, but with people who either work there or who are looking to purchase alcohol to take away. So it's not anticipated that traffic will be a major concern with this zoning amendment. Servicing, it's not anticipated that demands on the services of the district of Tofino will change significantly. Again, we're just expanding the existing use. We're not adding any sort of new major industrial uses or anything like that. Amending contribution, again, this will be triggered by the rezoning application. Had very preliminary discussions with the applicants about this, but I think before moving into more significant discussions, we'll see if the application moves forward. Hopefully have something by first reading and certainly by second reading to present to council should the application move forward. Impacts on other zones. This is kind of, again, depending on whether or not the application moves forward, but currently the accessory lounge definition includes not just breweries, but also includes distilleries. There is a distillery existing within the district of Tofino that may eventually want to take advantage of that accessory lounge definition. So rather than reworking the existing definition to expand the size and density of the existing definition, it is likely that staff would propose a zoning amendment that includes a new definition specific to this particular use on this particular property. And then one of the most important land use consideration, or in staff's opinion, one of the most important land use considerations would be to really kind of think about how an accessory, the limits of accessory use within this area. So within the industrial lands review, it does discourage the dilution of industrial lands through commercial use. However, it does encourage retail as an accessory use, and has those recommendations which staff are grateful for to provide some more specific direction. However, they are kind of guidelines and approximations, so that may be another part of the conversation throughout this application process. So some of the options would be to grant permission to proceed with the application, reject or refuse the application, defer, otherwise deal with the application. Staff are currently recommending the first option. Again, it is worth mentioning based on the previous application that we do not have particularly an alcohol policy, and that this is this application would potentially increase the use of alcohol in that area, or which stops that potentially it will. So next steps, should the application proceed, would be to draft a bylaw, bring the draft bylaw forward for first reading, then work through referrals, continue the amended discussion, second reading, public hearing before continuing on to the rest of the process. Any questions or comments?
Any questions for me?
I have a question. So if we're looking at a suggested 10% of, I'm sorry, if you could just flip the 10% as like an accessory or light industrial, and this uses 13%? The current accessory, floor space, yeah. Was any discussion had with the brewing company about what a max 10% looked like in configuring the space?
Yeah, there was some brief preliminary discussion. One thing that's also worth pointing out to do with the proposal is that this sort of section along here is also very much used for the industrial use of that particular property, and so it's not, it is shaded and is included in the density calculations as a path for people to walk along. However, it's not strictly an accessory use, it's actually very much an industrial use as well. So moving forward, should the application move forward, we'd be looking as staff to really kind of tighten up those numbers and understand exactly what 10% might look like, and what 11% might look like, what 12% might look like, and based on the existing and proposed uses. So there was some discussion as well about potentially decreasing the size of the upper mezzanine if needed, or things of that nature. But at this stage, staff kind of just want to bring the proposal forward to get council's initial ideas about it.
Any more questions?
The one thing I sort of struggle with this is what is this lounge use? And I think, I don't know if we define it really clearly, but I'm wondering, does that, it's meant to be a tasting lounge so you can sample the products, so does that limit the number of drinks that can be served or anything like that? Is it defined like that, or does it basically have the same type of a liquor license as a pub? So there's a definition thing that I kind of struggle with, this idea that it's a lounge and not a bar or a pub, some other definition where in land use that we use that kind of defines what the use is a little more. So so are we moving it along from being a place where you sample the products of a brewery to a place where you go and drink, or where does it fall on that scale?
So my understanding is that the original zoning amendment application from 2016 was basically brought forward to take advantage of new provincial regulations that permitted these types of breweries to have what were described as accessory lounges, tasting lounges. Prior to that, I believe my understanding, and I might actually defer to Aaron about this, but was that basically the brewery was permitted by provincial license to only serve one drink per person. So this accessory lounge zoning definition basically was created to come in line with some provincial regulations that were brought into place around the same time that allowed more than one drink to be served in that area. And again, I'm not certain, but does not require full meals. It's kind of like a liquor primary license. However, the brewery is required to serve food alongside the beer that they serve, which is why they have sort of pre-made food for sale there on offer in order to remain in compliance with your provincial license. Aaron, do you have any additional comments?
And the other question I have is around the parking calculation. That takes into account now the total number of workers that are at the brewery and the additional residential use that's proposed.
Yeah, that's correct. So there's currently one staff accommodation unit that's in the process of being renovated. It is proposed to have 2 bedrooms. It's under a housing agreement from the previous zoning amendment application that basically limits the total rent that can be charged for that unit, and also the people that can live in that unit. And so under the zoning bylaw, each dwelling unit is required to have 1 dedicated parking space, and then for every 200 square meters of floor space of industrial area, there's 1 required parking space as well. So by considering the entire floor area of the industrial use and subtracting the proposed use of the accessory lounge, our calculations worked out to 5 parking spaces that would be required for the industrial use. So that would be for staff use essentially, which would then, under the zoning bylaw, leave 22 parking spaces for use of the accessory lounge.
And then finally, I guess this is not for you, but as a comment, I think there was quite a bit of discussion with council to originally allowed for the number of seats that were there. So I'd like to hear, I guess, from Councillor McMaster, that's no one else is here that was in that discussion about how that number was arrived at. Because this seems more than doubling it to be quite a leap from whatever discussion took place at that time. So yeah.
Any other questions?
It's once again not so much questions but comments. But once again, I'm viewing this through a different lens that you've been charged to look through, which is where we don't have that framework in place as you have clearly articulated. So I'll try to refrain from going into that avenue at this time. There is some discussion about the dilution of those industrial lands, and with the expansion of the not retail but accessory use. This is just how much room for expansion of the industrial part is still left on that on the property that they have. I don't quite fully know on that if we're taking the potential for the industrial part, which we're very, and replacing it with more of the accessory use. Does that make sense?
Yeah, certainly. So in conversation with the applicants, they don't really have any plans, from what I've been informed, to kind of expand the use or expand the property itself, or pardon me, expand the buildings on the property. And I think the other thing that would then be strongly affected would be parking. If you're starting to take parking away to construct new industrial areas, that would then likely limit the space and seating, the accessory lounge, and also kind of how much building you can actually build. Lot coverage is also a consideration. My understanding is that the area that's being used for an accessory lounge currently is kind of not earmarked for further industrial use. And I'm not sure if that answers the question.
It does.
But yeah, it is.
I can't help myself but to touch on the other framework that we don't. Ironically, this may sound, the one thing that I see as the difference between the previous and where you have a more supervised situation. I have troubles with the proposed expansion of doubling numbers. Seating to, without question, will increase the use of alcohol in this area. Listening to Councillor Chalmers in terms of that, other aspect that might be considered. Where I do see support, in a sense, is that these areas are with trained staff, supervised in these areas that have the ability to help mitigate those potential damages. So I actually see some benefit to that. I don't see the benefit in doubling that space. So my feeling on this one is that I would like to see where potentially this could go. So I do feel that there is some support for the permission to proceed on this one.
Any more questions, or I'll let Pete say? Thank you. Any comments?
I'm not in favour of doubling it. I mean, 88 seats, that's almost as big as McQuina. And right from day one, the brewery has always said it doesn't want to be a bar or a food pub. I mean, 88 seats, you're looking at a bar. I don't care what the definition of an accessory lounge is. You're looking at a bar, and I would argue that the brewery's been operating as a bar since day one. So I won't support doubling to 88 seats. I think the brewery wants to come forward and say they want to a primary liquor license and develop a bar. That's a totally different conversation. But doubling the accessory lounge to 88 seats, I don't think is wrong.
Peter. Just to further to that, at this point it is a proposed 88 seats, and so that at a discussion phase, we would have the ability to comment on that and to with staff probably, as has already been indicated, that probably won't fly, and I'm sure with the understanding that there could be a revision of that proposal to something that might be more palatable. Is that generally how this would work?
Yeah, that's correct.
Thank you.
So to clarify, Councilman Master, you would be interested in some and not the total amount, or are you?
I'll listen to what the people have to say.
Yeah, I'm in favor of permission to proceed. I think that this bears an exploration, and I don't see anything here that raises too many red flags. I'm interested in understanding a little bit more about, 10% versus 13%, but there's nothing here that stops me from voting to proceed.
Yeah, I thought 88 was a jump, and like I said, I'd really like more rationale than just we want more business. I do think that I want to know how we arrived at 35 to begin with, because I want to hear the rationale for that too, and then there's some room to look at what falls in between there, and then how far it wants to go. It does seem, anytime I visited the brewery, that it is a little bit constraining at 35. So I think somewhere in between is worth looking at. But yeah. So I'd like to see some reasons for around the numbers. So I am in favor of proceeding.
Can I ask a question why increasing business is not a good enough reason to? Just out of curiosity.
Why? Because we're here to look at all things about the community and not just economics.
Okay.
And maximizing everything economically is not the only goal we have at this table.
Awesome. It's a question for myself,
Yeah.
and I think for the greater audience, is that I do think sometimes council can be viewed a little bit and is sometimes business unfriendly. So I think it's wise in the context of the conversation that we've just had about the gas and go, to understand that we are looking at a large number of factors here. Because often I think my impetus is to go with small business, is to go with locally owned business, and understanding the context and lens in which I think it is worth discussing in a more public way.
Yeah,
look at what it adds to the community and what pressures it puts on the community, things like that. So. you know, whatever you're looking at, it's not just economics, it's Councillor Anderson's.
Just to follow up on that, I mean, we want a healthy community, we want a livable community, we want housing, all those goals that we are expressed and we were elected on. Economic development actually fell fairly low on the entire picture that people are expressing. And so it's still there. It's not a bad thing or anything like that. But of all the things that people want us to base our decisions on, economic development is only one piece of it, and not the biggest piece, I'd say. So.
Okay. Does anybody want to make a motion?
I'd like if Mr. Rogers can remind us why we came up with 35 seats. Was it floor area? Or?
Yeah, it was a combination. I think originally, and I'm stretching back here a couple of years, but we had sort of come, the original number was 50, and then through a combination of council discussion and then looking back at the actual floor they had, it ended up at 35. That's my memory of it. I wouldn't mind taking a look back at the report, but I do remember that the original plan was probably for 50 seats. I didn't do, again, negotiations very similar to what's happening now, and it ended up at 35. I remember somewhat, I won't say clearly, because remember the funny thing, but that it was a 35 was a go or no go for at the council table, rather than at a staff level.
Motion, perfect. I'll make a motion that staff proceed with further review of the zoning amendment application for 691 Industrial Way.
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? I'm just going to call a 2-minute recess.
Oh, yeah. Thanks. No,
George.
And you see it pushes up to 50, and then the next year they come back and they want to go up to 75.
Yeah, and just gotta get over there. I mean, there's no end to the amount of success that restaurants and bars can have in this town. You could build until, you know, until every piece of land is covered, and then you end up with that, a giant.
My only problem is that doesn't matter what rule we invoke, the brewery ignores it anyway and does what they want.
What's worse, bar versus selling? Bar.
There's more control to the bar. Well, I think the liquor inspectors are more strict on the bar.
What's that?
I'm wondering.
Buy a bottle of wine.
You want to do that?
I'm looking for a carrier.
Yeah, you put her on the sort of jump into like, rather than no, you the early part.
Yeah,
I felt like it was maybe a little bit.
Yeah, that's what it was. Was there any concern? Do you felt discussion was happening?
No, I think so. No, but it's just.
Pardon me? Sorry, it's going too fast.
It's probably.
Next thing, next.
It's good to, it mitigates your nervousness when it comes to visibility out to council bids. It's not all. So it's, yeah.
Distribution.
I still observe this.
Once a week. Yeah, once a week, and then I'm supposed to like do it on my own. Like to. Once a month, like. I can sometimes. Twice. Like on my own. Was it about an hour?
Super.
Freezing, I guess.
How's your note taken?
Just check out.
It's a time
Right on.
for sure.
Run down what everybody said?
Yeah, photographs.
Very good, yeah.
I'm going to run through council.
Did his job.
I think that'd be the last person.
Even though there's nothing we can do.
Hey, Declan, how's your puppy? For the younger guy.
He's good. He's a little deep though. Puppies are brutal. Yeah.
Would you like to chat with you guys on your break?
Sure.
I came home yesterday and
I'm ready for council.
I've heard
found
that.
CD in his mouth. Oh yeah. Almost a 1-year-old.
It's a good thing Sandy's never gonna die, because I don't want to go to a puppy phase ever.
I would.
House trained? Man, and like she's a viewer. So like my car, my first car, so when I had her, she like ripped out just everything, all the upholstery, it's all just shut. And then they learn, and then it's good, but man, that's not phase. There were some babies, man.
I got 2 weeks of ran through the cafe.
Somebody comes with a chicken.
And somebody 3 and 4 years.
That sounds like it. Or just, I got a call back. So maybe after. Are you taking our call?
He's definitely got Robin right now. He knows he can't get away with so much from me.
Well, I'll check this out. No, do I need to wait for Nala or should I need, okay. I'll call us back to. Call us back to order?
Are you going to?
Yeah.
I just read it.
Let the minutes reflect.
There's an hour.
It's on video, okay.
Yeah. Okay, excuse me, George.
Yeah.
I'm just calling us back to order. Okay, so I'm moving on to fees and false alarms bylaws. Do we have a report? We have a report from corporate services.
Yes, you do.
Thank you.
So the fees and charges review comes from a 2018 motion of council to review existing fine schedules and fees, terms and conditions to ensure that they are current and fairly reflect the cost of services being provided. And staff was directed to develop a policy for the regular review of fees, or where appropriate, an annual increase related to inflation. So during this part of the project, obviously that's quite a broad motion and it touches on many departments, so this portion of it is restricted to the District of Tofino Administrative Fees, Terms and Conditions Bylaw number 1153, enacted in 2012. And we're actually just recommending a replacement of that bylaw with new fine schedules and also a new bylaw to impose fees for false fire alarms. As I said, there are other components to the motion, and those will be taken up by different departments as time allows, or when the opportunity presents itself. So there's permit fees, planning and development fees, and then we've got all the fines and penalties in our MTI and bylaw notice bylaws that are not part of this review. Council's authority to enact fees comes from the community charter, and there are several areas in which a council can impose a fee. So typically those are services or a part of a service, so water and sewer fees are an example. For the use of municipal property, like the community hall fee or the rec van.
and the exercise of your authority to regulate, prohibit, or impose requirements. So you've got permit and license fees as well. The authority to impose penalties, fines, is found elsewhere, and it's not included in this review, as I mentioned. The rationale on which a local government can impose a fee is really up to you as a council. There are many different factors on which you can establish a fee for something. So you can also establish different rates of fees for different classes of people, places, or activities. So some of those rationales might be cost recovery or keeping up with inflation, and then there's also other considerations that councils tend to take into consideration, such as the cumulative effect of multiple fees on top of one another, or the ability of a user group to pay, like youth or seniors. When interpreting or when looking at local government fees, courts have said that the amount charged does not necessarily need to correspond precisely to the service that's being provided, so long as there's a reasonable connection between the two, and that's what we would call a nexus. And that comes up in other areas of our work as well. So as long as there's a reasonable connection. In the direction that council gave to staff, you can see that sort of one of these areas is being highlighted, the cost of services being provided, as well as inflationary increases to stay current with the cost of those services. So it's a cost recovery type of rationale. Generally, cost recovery has 3 goals, and this is sort of taken from public policy literature, and it's found throughout the provincial, federal governments and other agencies. How they sort of rationalize cost recovery is to promote the efficient allocation of resources. So trying to eliminate the excess demand that often exists with free goods, promoting the unequitable approach to financing local government programs by fairly charging those who benefit from services beyond those enjoyed by the general public. So to be very clear, fees are not taxation. Taxation is generally used to support the activities that benefit Tofinons broadly, whereas a fee is charged for something that more so benefits an individual and is above the regular day-to-day operations of the government. And then to earn a fair return for Tofinons for access to publicly owned or controlled resources. So to this end, staff has already reviewed this bylaw several times in the past few years, and the following amendments were made for the ones that you can see on the screen. We've added fees for LiDAR and GIS. Community Children's Center fees were reviewed in 2016 as well, and then the Community Hall Rental and Rec Program and rental fees, or van rental fees, were reviewed in 2018, all with cost recovery, those 3 goals in mind. So new amendments that we're proposing in the sort of revised bylaw include some sort of general overarching amendments. So these 2 that you'll see on the screen are the addition of a 20% administrative fee to services calculated at actual cost. And this fee is intended to cover staff time for locating, creating, procuring, mailing, or coordinating items and services. So an administrative fee is not just lost, it's really to cover the staff time that goes into providing certain fees or certain services. And then the addition of a 1-hour minimum of staff time charged where fees are listed as wages and benefits to ensure cost recovery of the mobilization of that staff member, administration, and then also demobilization, which is not usually captured if you're just charging for the staff time on that specific student service. Other amendments to the proposed bylaw are a general restructuring of the bylaw. So the old one was just a little bit hard to administer, a little bit hard to look at, hard to find what you were, or even hard to understand some of the language, so cleaning up a bit of the language. We've added fees for services that did not previously have an associated fee, like the provision of a USB device. We don't usually use compact discs anymore if someone's asking for something, so updating a little bit, and printing large format documents such as maps, as well as shipping. Shipping costs aren't included in the old bylaw. We've increased fees where necessary for cost recovery, so the addition of the 20% administrative fee, for example, and then decreasing fees where necessary. So
We did take into account the cumulative impacts of certain fees, and that's more so on the administrative fees. So when someone is asking for information about their property or their tax bill, those often can compound into multiple charges, and keeping that in mind when you're setting the fees for those administrative costs is a regular practice when setting those smaller fees of printing versus staff time, also accessing a water bill. You don't want to make those all really large charges because cumulatively they add up to something that is a little bit unaffordable and maybe out of line with what the service actually is. And then we also decreased a few fees in line with the Blue Book. I think that's mentioned in the report. So public works time and machine fees were calculated sort of somewhere between what's being used by the provincial government as well as other municipalities. And our fees were generally in line, but some of them did come down a little bit. And then we removed fees for services that are no longer being offered, such as the directory signage fees that we don't have anymore. I'm happy to speak to any of the fees in particular if council had questions. So they are broken out into appendices for different service areas. And I think Appendix 1 to your report is a table of concordance that sort of shows you what the fee was versus what it is now. And if you had any specific questions, I'm happy to talk about them.
Any questions? I did see that we lowered some of the public works fees. Can you speak a little bit more to that for me?
Yeah, so they're a little more clear now, and they're not reduced that much when you include the operator.
Okay.
They're just broken out in a different way. So they are reduced somewhat from what was listed in our old bylaw, but we're also now requiring a 1 hour minimum time for the operator. So on balance, it doesn't change that much. It's just a little bit easier to understand what someone might actually be charged.
Great, thank you. Councilor Stewart?
Did you look to see how our fees compare with some other similar sized communities?
Yes.
And if we're in line or out of line?
Yes, that was the primary way of understanding where our fees are and how to establish them. Unfortunately, UCLUET just copied our bylaw, which wasn't that helpful for us to review our own fees if they're just copying us. So we did look at other communities of a similar size and then also in the region for comparison.
And can you build in a sort of cost of living increase?
No.
Are you allowed to do that?
That was a question that we took to our solicitors, and it's a difficult one to apply across the entire bylaw, especially when we're looking at really small fees. So a better practice is to review your bylaws more often, and so that kind of policy will have to come back to council, but building it into the bylaw is quite difficult. The only exception that we do have already in the bylaw is for the community center, and those fees do increase with the negotiated fee increases to account for staff wages, and then as we have now defined staff wages and benefits, that will increase as well as we pay staff at different rates over the years. But the individual smaller fees such as printing and access to information, it's very difficult to increase that by 2% each year when it's maybe a 25-cent fee. So the better practice would be to review in 5 years and again.
One of the questions, thank you for the explanation of this. One of my only concerns about any time we increase fees, or thankfully in some cases decrease, is the potential for access to be not accessible to everyone, at the same time recognizing that some of these services could be abused if there aren't a cost associated with them. I'm just curious, does that part of the equation come into your equation?
Absolutely. Yes, and I think there are different, the fees are all different in these different areas. The services we're providing vary across those different service areas, so the analysis varies a little bit too. When we're charging for kind of the example I gave earlier of the cumulative impact of some administrative fees, that definitely factors into the lens. And then when we're looking at recreation fees as well, we do see recreation as one of the services, sort of one of the it's not just user pay. There are considerations for the Kids Access Fund. There are different ways of setting fees in that kind of service, although we do require it to be cost recovery. We look at the best way to provide the service and not be prohibitive. So we're not looking at recreation fees the same way that we're looking at public works fees, certainly.
That's good work. And I did have one other question. Who came up with Tofinons?
That's something that I looked up because Tofino is incorrect based on the root of the word.
Thank you.
But colloquial, yeah, if you know correct, is up to the user. Native speaker can't make a mistake.
Thank
you. Where do all the fees for development planning fall? Is it administrative fees or?
They're not. They're in their own land use administration. What is it? It's like the land. I can't remember the name of the bylaw, but they are in a separate bylaw so that they're clearly associated with the permits to be issued.
Are those going to be reviewed as well?
They will be. They just weren't part of this project.
And do you have a sense overall if this result in sort of this about the same revenue to the district or slight increase? Or?
I don't have a sense of the overall effect because we have so many varying service areas in this one bylaw. It's really hard to say exactly what's going to, if people are going to use less services because the fee has increased a small bit, it will likely increase revenue somewhat for some of these fees, especially with staff time. I would expect that to increase revenues in terms of covering the cost of staff's time spent on these smaller administrative tasks. But overall, it's sort of hard for me to definitively say. Okay. I don't expect
we'll
it to
know
increase
more
in revenue.
probably at budget time.
Yeah. Okay. I have a bit more to the presentation because there's a separate component to this that is the false alarm bylaw. So the rationale for this bylaw, in discussion with our fire chief, we have a significant amount of false alarms each year, 20 to 30 each year, and sometimes 10 from the same property, or more. I think to date, or when I was writing this report, I had asked the chief, and there were in excess of 10 already at that point of the year, and that was when I started writing this in the late spring. So I don't know the number now, but it's 17 false alarms. So the rationale for charging for these types of services is really the threat to our responders and then also members of the public. So when you mobilize a fire truck or an emergency response, you're putting everyone on the road at risk, as well as potentially delaying the response to a true emergency. And this is something that many other communities have dealt with and put in place a bylaw to mitigate some of that risk. The bylaw doesn't charge for your first false alarm, and also I'll just note that the provisions are much more intended towards those properties that employ a fire alarm monitoring service, which automatically contacts the fire department. So we're not really targeting the home user that has a false alarm here and there. Generally, that doesn't even escalate to a call to the fire department. If someone is burning toast, generally they deal with it before it escalates to that point. But we do allow for one first false alarm for free. We're definitely not trying to discourage anyone from calling the fire department from a suspected fire. These are issues that we deal with from alarm monitoring services, where an alarm goes off and there's no one on site, or potentially the people staying there are tourists and they don't know how to disconnect or stop the false alarm after they've burnt their toast or whatever the issue might be. So the requirements that we're putting in place are requiring a contact person, and that contact person must be available by phone to attend the false alarm, and they must be able to operate the alarm system. So those are the two requirements that are most common in other communities. And then the associated fees and fines. So we would be charging a fee in the new proposed fee bylaw. The first alarm in each year, it has no charge to it. The second in a 12-month period is $150, and then third and above are at $200, and that's cover the costs of mobilizing our fire truck and fire department. And then there are fines associated depending on the offense, and they range from $100 to $300, and that's the third bylaw in your package to amend our bylaw notice bylaw. That's the end of the presentation. If you have questions. Any questions? No? Thank you.
Does anybody want to move the recommendation?
Take my turn. Recommendation 1, that District of Tofino fees and charges bylaw number 1271, 2019 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
And that District of Tofino false alarm bylaw number 1272, 2019 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second, third? Second. Okay, any discussion? All in favor?
And that District of Tofino bylaw notice amendment bylaw number 1107-12, 2019 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time.
Second. Any discussion? And all in favor? Okay. So now we're moving on to the Provincial Plastics Action Plan feedback, and we have a report from Corporate Services.
I don't have a presentation for this, just an update to council, and I'm here to answer any questions about it. So a brief history is, as you all know, we have a bylaw in place that restricts plastic straws and bags, and we do that in tandem with the District of Ucluelet. And since then, there's been a major court challenge to the City of Victoria bylaw, which has been now struck down, but our bylaw remains intact. And in that process, the province has really become a lot more involved and alive to this issue, as well as the federal government. So a lot of people are stepping into this realm, and the province of BC has put out a consultation paper that is hoping to engage the public and a lot of other sectors. And I was contacted by my colleagues in other local governments to provide a joint response, a submission on behalf of sort of our sector of smaller local governments in particular. But we did engage with, City of Victoria, all the Lower Mainland municipalities as well, and discussed what a joint response would look like and what our major feedback would be to the provincial plastics action plan. So I think the report aligns that we have 4 areas of commonality between us, and they were the prioritization of the reduction and reuse over recycling and disposal, clarification of local government authority. So as it is, it's still somewhat unclear where the concurrent authorities end or what the limits of them are. A phased or stepped approach to regulation, allowing some people to move slower, others to move faster, all meeting the same goal at a certain time with respect to the restriction of certain plastics. Improvement of the extended producer responsibility program, and adequate internal and external consultation. So meaning that the health authorities should be included in this discussion, as well as the ministry responsible for local government. And to date, we have sent out the letters in your package to many local governments, and as of this morning, I had 5 signatories. So District of Tofino and District of Squamish collaborated on the letter together. We have the Regional District of South Okanagan, the Resort Municipality of Whistler, Rossland, Cumberland, Ucluelet, and likely Victoria so far have signed onto our letter, but we expect many more as the council dates for many of the municipalities are spread out throughout the month. So we have until the 30th of September to submit this feedback to the province, and we're hoping to have quite a bit of support from our colleagues around the province. Any questions?
Thank you. Any questions?
Yeah, just sort of a little bit of a side issue, but do you have any idea or any sense of why the Victoria bylaw was struck down, and does that put our bylaw at any further risk? Because I believe we kind of used some of their bylaw to base ours on.
That's correct. We did. I think everyone was relying on the City of Victoria's sort of model for their own plastics bylaws. I think to date 23 municipalities in all of BC have similar bylaws to ours and Victoria's, and only Victoria's has been struck down. So ours is still in place until challenged, but certainly it raises a risk if we were to be challenged on the same grounds that we don't have the ability to regulate in the area of the environment. So there are these different areas of responsibility. Some are squarely within municipal control, some are squarely within provincial control, and we have a few overlapping concurrent authorities. Health, environment, and maybe like wildlife are just a few. And so Victoria has been told that they needed to get provincial approval to do this. Not that it can't be done, but that the process they followed didn't get provincial approval. And so they are still looking at their options, whether or not they take that to the Supreme Court, or whether they just rescind their bylaw, go through a different process with the same nuts and bolts of the bylaw, but the process would involve the province approving it. So that's the major challenge to them.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Motion?
I'll move that the report titled Provincial Plastics Action Plan Feedback dated September 10th, 2019 be received for information.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor? Okay. So now we're moving on to District Water and Sewer Amendment Bylaw, number 1213.02, 2019, for adoption.
That the District of Tofino Water and Sewer Utility Amendment Bylaw number 1213.02, 2019 be adopted.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor? Okay, and
I'll move that the District of Tofino zoning amendment bylaw number 1169 2012 be read a third time.
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Move that the District of Tofino zoning bylaw number 1243/2018 be read a third time.
Second.
Any discussion? No, all in favor? Okay. There's no business initiated by council. So we're on to question period now. Are there any questions from the audience? Sorry, Andrew Bailey.
Right on,
Sorry.
thank you. My name's Andrew Bailey, I'm with the West Philly News. I have, I think I've got 3 questions. First of all, is the district taking an official stance that Tofino should replace Tofisha? Will that be consistent in staff reports is my question. Will that word, will Tofino be consistent in staff reports where Tofisha would have previously been used?
No.
We don't have a style guide, so I'm not aware that it would be considered.
I think staff did that just to see if we read.
Everyone noticed it.
Yeah.
Everyone noticed that one.
It was in bold, too.
A real question here is, I am hoping to get some clarification on why some minds were changed in terms of the gas and go. I've got on May 28th regular meeting, we discussed this, we did the permission to proceed thing, it was a phenomenal presentation, really good discussion, and Steer and McMaster were both very much opposed, and they were both very vocal about their opposition. But other councillors expressed support, and I'm wondering what's changed between then and I guess this meeting to have changed your opinion. To do a specific question, Councillor McQuaid, you had suggested you didn't want to say no to this until the amenity conversation happened. Obviously that hasn't happened, so what's changed your mind?
Yeah, I am taking part in the Collaborative Services Committee. It's comprised of members of the medical community here, mental health and addiction services. And upon further discussion, the lack of a municipal alcohol policy, the discussion with our first responders about the further pressure that would be put on them, and the possibility, my own personal examination of as I said, that tension between reducing our parking resources or putting pressure on those first responder resources. It's just something that was a little bit untenable for me. So a lot of it was informed by the Collaborative Services Committee and the discussions that have been happening there. And yeah.
Really good answer.
Great.
Thank you so much. Councillor Chalmers or Councillor Anderson, do you want to speak to you changing your mind at all on this specific vote?
I didn't change my mind.
Were you opposed to it?
No, I was. I know. I was opposed to shutting it down. So I would say that.
Councillor Chalmers voted in opposition to the council motion.
Oh, of course. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Sorry about that. Councillor Anderson, would you like to speak to why your vote changed?
I wouldn't call it a complete change. I was weighing out the options of it, and at the time I spoke to what was presented in the staff report, that I saw some benefits to maybe reducing traffic in town. But since then, we've received letters, and I've talked to people in the community that don't see it as being a favorable way to move. So it was pretty basic, and I wouldn't say that I was in favor of moving forward to get this report. I wouldn't categorize it as being in favor of the proposal at the time, which is quite often the way council moves. That they move to look into it at a certain point, and then upon hearing more, then a better decision can be made upon receiving more information, which is where we're at today.
Now, you guys are shot out of a cannon today. It came up twice. It came up in that conversation, and then it came up to a lesser extent with the brewery application in terms of this liquor policy that Dr. Hasselbeck suggested. Are we working towards that? Have we done any work towards directing staff to put something together? Where are we at in terms of just the idea of having a liquor policy in Tofino?
I guess I could speak to that. It's premature to actually, but I have had discussion with staff about what's called a municipal alcohol policy MAP, is the acronym. It's very preliminary at this time, just understanding the process, bringing together possibly the resources that might be needed for that, and looking at when the appropriate timing of such an initiative might be the most appropriate.
Good. Hey, thank you so much. That's all the questions I had. You guys crushed it. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, could I have a motion to move to close it?
I move that the meeting be closed to the public pursuant to sections 91A, C, E and 92B of the Community Charter to discuss matters relating to personal information about an individual holds or is being considered for a position as an officer, employee or agent, employee relations, the acquisition of land or improvement, information held in confidence relating to negotiations between the municipality and the provincial government.
Second.
All in favor? Discussion? All in favor?